Hi, everybody. This is Digital Marketing Depot. We are broadcasting live. I'm Chris McDonough. Thanks for joining us for Global Content Marketing for Enterprise, Today's Technologies and Tactics. We are very happy to welcome Scott Abel and Dr. Andrew Bredenkamp. Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing today?
We're good. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you for being here. We really do appreciate it. I'm going to tell the audience just a couple of things and then get right into the meat of this presentation. All right, audience, if you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use that Ask a Question box really at any time during the broadcast. I'll store them all up and we'll get to a live Q&A at the end of the broadcast. If you want to check out a friend or Acrolinks or Digital Marketing Depot, there are some buttons at the bottom of your screen. You can just click on those and they'll take you where you want to go. As always, we are recording this broadcast. I will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon, pretty much right after this webcast is over. I'll let you know when it's ready by an email blast, or just feel free to check back at our website at digitalmarketingdepot.com. All right, with that business taken care of, I am going to briefly introduce our speakers and get us going here. Scott Abel is the founder and president of the Content Wrangler, co-founder of the Intelligent Content Conference, Information Development World, and founding member of Content Management Professionals. Scott is globally recognized as one of the most engaging experts in the field of content strategy, and his conferences have drawn thousands of attendees. Next up, we have Dr. Andrew Bredenkamp. He has over 20 years of experience in multilingual content development. Before starting Acrolinks, Andrew was head of the Technology Transfer Center at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence. With all that taken care of, feel free to add more information about yourselves, guys, when you come on board. In the meantime, audience, we also have a full bio of our speakers to the left side of your console if you'd like to take a look a little bit further. All right, Scott, I'm going to go ahead and push out your first slide and get you guys on your way. There you go.
All right. Well, Andrew, we've got three big challenges that we're going to talk about today. Would you like to start with Unify?
Sure. Yeah. So Unify, there's always three things, but I think it's really interesting to think about these challenges. The big challenge around Unify is really to think about. There's lots of talk right now about content strategy and developing ideas around how to be really good at content. One of the issues I think that is starting to come up is how to scale that across the enterprise to do something larger than just have one really good piece of content. So as content marketing has emerged and as the ideas of content marketing have engaging your audience with content that they're interested in, all those good things, as those ideas have evolved, people have been trying to get around the idea of what does that mean to do that at a really large scale. So if you look at what people were thinking about in last year, the beginning of last year, people were thinking about in the world of content marketing, the biggest concern they had was how can I produce more content? Producing enough content was the biggest challenge by a long way. And that, I think, is because people were being told you need to be talking to your audience every day, and it needs to be a constant conversation, and all these things. And it felt like the biggest challenge was to do enough. Engaging content, which is really reaching those people, was secondary. So this was, I think, a reaction to this idea of we have to get out there and be marketing, and marketing means throwing content at people. And of course, what we saw very quickly was that this turned into a flood of content, and we would talk to people who would say, I'm gonna create. I've got my goals, and my goals are to create 2 blog posts a week from my team, and things like this. Just numbers, amounts of content, without really thinking so much about about what the experience was on the other end of that. Scott, I think you've seen this kind of race to the bottom in terms of content quantity in some of your work, right?
I agree. I think maybe part of the confusion starts when we talk about a strategy. So a content strategy, to me, before we talk about what it is and figure out how to make a unified one, I think we have to exclude the activities that are not actually part of content strategy, like deliverables and how you're going to accomplish them and the tactical level things, right? The strategy is really that phase that comes before any of these activities that we do, and it determines what activities are needed to help us do what we're trying to do. So I think it presumes that we have some vision of what we expect, and we have goals, and we have some kind of plan for getting there. But I think sometimes we also get lost in the minutia of what we're creating, and we focus too much on the deliverables and less on making sure that we can do it in a unified, streamlined, consistent way so that we don't confuse our prospects and customers.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I mean, I think just not only not thinking so much just about deliverables, how many mails do we want, how many blogs do we want, whatever, but also, thinking about what the experience is on the other end for your target audience. How many mails do you want from? Are they likely to want from us in an average week? I know I have a very low tolerance on getting too many emails or too much attention from companies that are after my business. So one of the developments,
it's natural, right?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say I think it's natural, and we should probably point this out to the audience, for a company to send out the same kind of materials to all their customers when they're small and they're resource constrained and they don't have any kind of technology behind them to help. But in companies that maybe are a little bigger and they have budget and they have people who are dedicated to doing these things, they often talk about delivering the right piece to the right person at the right time in the right language, but they haven't done the groundwork to make it easy. So I think when, even for me as a small company, I know how to do these things. I advise people how to do it. But as a small company, I don't have the resources, right, to segment all my lists. But today, technology is changing. Even small, inexpensive technologies are starting to recognize our need for this. So I think this will change, right? Everybody will get better at creating the right kinds of content and not just flooding the market with it. But we have to intentionally do that.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute, but I think the thing is, this is being now seen as a critical competitive advantage. It's okay not to do this as long as none of your competition is doing this, right? If any of your competition are doing it, you're gonna get left behind because they will get all the attention. That's the key difference. I think this content is now being seen as a battleground where you can with relatively little resources, really, if you do it well, you can outcompete the competition. But of course, just having lots of content is not the answer. And early on in the history of content marketing, as it emerged, and this race to create as much content as possible led to a backlash. And Doug Kessler was one of the first to put his finger on this. There's a great SlideShare you can find from Doug Kessler on his SlideShare channel called Crap, which is why so much content is why the biggest threat to content marketing is content marketing, in the sense of this idea of we need more content. We need more content. The quality issue is always going to be important, and we've started looking as part of Acrolinx's analysis of this. We were interested in understanding how does quality play a role in this, and what's the kind of level of quality that content that we can find out there. And so we started publishing this global content impact index that we do quarterly. There's a slightly different focus to it every quarter. You can get it off our website. But the idea here is to look at a whole different ranges of content. We've checked millions of pages, hundreds of thousands of pages in this particular one, but we've checked millions of pages over the period of preparing for this, and we've looked at the level of content. We have this scoring system, a very sophisticated scoring system for content, and we can see that in fact a large proportion of the content is under this threshold. You can see the red dots there are under this magic number of 72, which is just a number that we picked from our experience of looking at this stuff. there's a lot of content below the line. And in terms of the impact of this poor content, it's been very interesting to look at how those scores then correlate with, for example, a reputation ranking thing like Alexa, which will give you your rankings over time. And you can see here what we found was that there was a strong correlation between low content scores and a trend on reputation. So those that consistently did well were consistently going up in terms of their Alexa rankings, and those that did badly or were very inconsistent were trending downwards. So I mean, this I think just shows you how the quality issue really drives the business, or can drive the business in one direction or another. And that's really what I meant when I said this is a competitive advantage. So the field has grown up a bit. I think, Scott, perhaps you could say a little bit about this. You know, this is, I think, from this year's survey, and I think this for us is a sign of the content industry as a whole growing up, right?
I think so, and these two statistics here are deeply related in my book. Engaging content, of course, we need to create content that dazzles and intrigues and delivers interest, right, to our customers, and that's a challenge that top content marketing firms still, or departments still struggle with. But producing content consistently plays a huge role in whether content is successful, because you could have engaging content from one part of your company, you know, maybe you're siloed a little bit or your departments are not totally in sync, and those inconsistencies not only cause challenges internally, but they cause customers to wonder what happened. There was engaging content and interesting content here, and then everything got serious, and then this got confusing, and then I called a support line, and they told me something totally different. So I think we have bigger challenges to kind of examine and figure out how could we unify those things so that people who are our native language speakers alone can understand. Imagine how hard it might be to have less than consistent usage of vocabulary and be some English as a second language person trying to understand our content. It can be really challenging for people, and we don't want to put obstacles in their way. We want to engage them, and we want to interact with them.
Yeah, and I think the consistency thing is really important. Engaging, you know, being engaging is clearly you know, the matter of getting interest and developing the relationship. But once you get interest and you have a relationship, then that's your relationship as a company with the company or with your target audience or with the prospect or whatever. That then has to be one. It's as if it's one personality that you want to project. And as we look into to bring that, you know, the consistency thing forward, if we think of you know, a lot of companies are now starting to think about the buyer journey. So what are the stages that the prospect or you know, you're looking to convert people to customers, you're looking to convert people to happy customers. What is the journey from them first becoming aware that you exist to buying and then being happy to have the product or offering, whatever it is. And so people have started to model these journeys. And of course, like we like to make nice, clean charts with stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and I think many of you would have probably seen your own slides in your own organizations of what these buyer journeys look like. But in fact, the buyer journey doesn't really look like that anymore. You know, Google search engines have changed the game considerably in the sense that when people are interested in you as an organization, there is no page 1, right? They don't start at the home page. They'll just dive in somewhere. They might start with a product review, or they might start with some other you know, some other analyst piece of content if it's a B2B thing, or they might, you know, get an email from a friend. They might land somewhere. Then all of a sudden they're just going to jump in somewhere and start in your content. And in fact, the journey then looks more like the picture on the right, which which comes from a presentation, a wonderful presentation by Erin Provey on this issue, where she talks about the mess of the journey is really just a random bouncing about. And if you look at those dots on the screen, the dots are inflection points. They're points where you bounce from one place to another. Almost all of those inflection points are pieces of content that you put in front of the person on their journey, and that's really a key way of thinking about what your content is doing for you. It's helping people move along, but not in a planned way, right, Scott?
Exactly. I mean, one of the messages I've learned recently, and there's a couple of consultants who talk about this, including a guy named Mark Baker, who kind of makes this his MO. His idea is that every page is page one, and that when we admit that there's a possibility that people could jump into our process somewhere we didn't anticipate, that we at least start to think about what that means, right? Maybe we can't magically make all content, serve everyone's needs simultaneously. We have limited screen real estate and attention spans and all that to deal with as well. But if we think that we can design a funnel or a linear process and then force people into it, it's a crazy thought. That's not how the world works today with content.
Yeah. I mean, I think there've been a whole range of really good presentations around this journey, this kind of pinball machine idea of how you bounce around while you're trying to make your decisions. But I think also what's also become clear is that the entirety of your content is potentially then supporting this process, including stuff that was typically regarded as after sales content. And if you think of the after sales experience, quite often we still see a lot of this. We still see a lot of beautiful color, glossy, shiny, really engaging content before people become customers, and then black and white, monochrome, dull, boring, cheap content after they've become a customer. The problem is that the customer, the prospect, the person who's not yet a customer, is just as likely to be reading the stuff on the right as the stuff on the left, because everything's online, whether you like it or not. Everything's online, and so the game has really changed. I think consistency is then a real challenge to do well at scale. When we talked about the top of this segment on Unify, how do you do this at scale? And one of the things we've done in the latest Content Impact Index is to look at consistency. So the consistency issue is really interesting. If you look at this is a very brief preview of the results, but if you look at the results carefully, you can see that in fact there's quite a lot of consistent content out there. The trouble is that of the content that we found that was consistent, the majority of it was actually low quality consistent. So you can see here 19%, not even a fifth of the companies we surveyed with our technology could get to the point of really saying we have consistent high quality content. And 13%, relatively scary number, were actually not only low quality, but were also extremely inconsistent. And then there's a whole bunch of people in the middle, the 41%, who are not necessarily getting consistently bad scores, but are actually just bumpy. The scores are all over the place. And I know that we've all experienced this in our daily lives, trying to get content from companies. I know, Scott, you've had you have some nice stories about the experience of trying to get stuff done and that not working out so well in terms of the content experience.
Yeah, I think one of the main things I've realized lately is that we're all consumers. So when we try to select an example to show, I used to try to conjure up some kind of business example or use a real case study from someone, but then I started to realize we're all consumers. We're consumers of the electric company. We're consumers of our own governments. As citizens, we're patients, which are a type of consumer for doctors' offices and medical facilities. We have the cable and internet providers and phone companies. And so we've all had those moments when we could not find what we needed. We didn't want everything. We just wanted an answer to a question. And I think
we got an answer, but it didn't help, right? We got some piece of content which was supposed to solve our problem, but it didn't.
Or confused us more. It led to frustration. And so then the active action of a customer seeking information from our brand became an irritant, not a solution. And I think that's the backwards. We don't want to be an irritant.
And to put it positively, actually doing that well, again, to come back to my point from earlier, doing that well then becomes something that gives you a competitive advantage, right?
Totally, and this is part of the reason why companies who do this very successfully don't always want to share their stories. And there are some, some examples where they're very proud to share their stories, and maybe that's just a difference in corporate culture. But some of the world's biggest brands actually do have a unified content strategy. It may not be unified across the entire enterprise, but there's usually several organizations, let's say marketing, technical communication, support, and training and sales that start to collaborate, and what they discover quickly is that they are inconsistent, and this may lead to some of the confusion and some of the calls to support and some of the frustration that we get, which leads to negative social media exposure, which of course impacts how other people might view our brand. So again, consistency can play such a huge role in many ways, but we can't isolate to marketing, right? Everything is marketing to the consumer. They blame the brand. They don't blame your department.
Yeah, they don't see your departments, exactly. Let's have a poll. I would like to hear kind of where you are, audience, with your organization. Does your organization have comprehensive brand guidelines for your content? We'd like to know whether you think you're awesome, you've got everything you need, and not only the visual aspects, but we have style and tone and voice. Is that all there? Or we're okay, we have some brand guidelines for the visuals and colors and fonts and stuff, but not much more than that. Or we don't really have comprehensive guidelines which apply to all our content. So we'd like you to be clicking buttons, and then we'll show the results shortly.
Andrew,
I know that a lot of people. Go ahead.
I was going to say this is a great question because there are lots of reasons to have guidelines, and many companies do, but just like we can have inconsistent content, we can have inconsistent brand guidelines and inconsistent style and tone guidelines from department to department because we are so isolated sometimes that we don't recognize that there are these differences built into our processes which actually support the confusion factor.
I'll tell you, if I could take a bet, when I ask this question, talking to organizations we work with, I think the majority of the time I would get the answer, yeah, we have lots. And that's almost worse than having nothing, is having everyone's got their own, right? Because then how are you going to get this consistency that we've just talked about if everyone's just making up their own standards? So, Chris, have you got some results for us?
We do. Hang on, I will push them out right now. There you go.
Oh, wow. So, okay. That's pretty good. I mean, that's actually 23% then I think are in pretty good shape, which I think is a higher number than probably, I guess our audience is aware of the issue, so they're probably coming from organizations that are already doing a good job generally. Nevertheless, 75%, three-quarters, maths has failed. Three-quarters of our audience is not in great shape. I think it's fair to say. How about we go for another poll question before we move on to the rest of the content? If you have documented brand guidelines of some kind? Are they followed consistently and globally? All of the time, most of the time, rarely or never. The consistency issue is one thing, I think, but as soon as you stretch this out beyond the beyond the home country, it starts to get very challenging. We have we wanted to make a few points about the global aspects of this, but I'd be interested to see, you've talked to companies trying to go global and trying to understand the challenges of going global, Scott, a fair amount, I think, right?
Yeah, and one of the main frustrations, because there's usually a champion or two inside the company that realizes what the problem is, and that's why they start the discussion. But it turns out that many people believe that just documenting your guidelines is somehow governing them. And so my question is, okay, so you wrote it down, now what? You know, how do we govern our rules? How do we make sure that that quality is there, that the consistency is there? We can't really rely on an editor. You know, it's not a fair human thing to make a human responsible for all the errors. There are better ways to kind of conduct governance, right? And so I think those are some of the new challenges for marketers and for other content creators is how do we enforce or at least guide our authors toward more successful, consistent content? And then how does that translate when we start to go global?
Yeah, and I think the numbers are very important. You know, getting governance on that. Getting governance is maybe the wrong word, but getting at least visibility into what do we have globally, I think is really important.
I think
Chris,
you're
do you
right.
have
Visibility first.
Yeah, visibility first, exactly.
I pushed them out for you.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Thank
sure
you.
That's what
Great.
you expected based on the other ones. There you go.
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, I mean, most of the time it sounds to me, I don't know what you think, Scott. Sounds to me a little bit hopeful. We think most of our content is consistent. I think that's where most people would hope they were. Right?
Yeah, I call myself an instigator. I often am brought in to help discuss these things, not necessarily fix them, right? But let's talk about them. Let's figure out what you really have. And the most of the time, answer is very common, especially if the people who you're speaking to come from the creative discipline and writing, because they know they're not really enforcing them 100%, and they're relying on humans to do it most of the time. But they don't always know what the errors are either. You know, just because let's assume we followed all of our corporate guidelines, but then there are other, guidelines. Are they relevant to the person? Do they make sense for the culture? Should we maintain our brand fidelity always? There are always all these other issues to talk about once we start to step outside of our local source content zone. So, if it's an American company, sometimes we tend to think very American, and so we figure that what we do is good enough. But it may introduce challenges and expenses too later.
Yeah, and of course there's other guidelines as well, right? There's stuff like findability and other kinds of things that have to be baked into the content for it to be successful as well. So
agreed.
Let's change gear a little bit and move to our next topic, which is the idea of acceleration. Now, what we've seen a lot of organizations doing is they are trying to get better. They're trying to be more engaging. They're trying to measure what they do, and they're trying to really make sure that they're consistent in what they do. But everything is getting faster, and I think the automation process has led to great steps, huge bounds in automating the process of content delivery, where you think about getting a content management system, or getting analytics to measure and track your content, being able to automate the process of delivering content, distributing it, taking it, getting it out mobile to all the platforms, I think the final piece of this puzzle is really to what we've seen now, as you can see also from the survey results that Content Marketing showed, and I think a little bit from the survey we've just seen, is the next big challenge. the big challenge that many companies now are facing is, what about the actual content? What about the process of building the content in such a way that we can do all this magic stuff with it, and actually caring about the content, whether we have the right content. The automation and the analytics and the management of the content is, if you like, the plumbing. It's the infrastructure that gives you the ability to do stuff. Now the question is, what are you going to do? So thinking about that in terms of how do we make the content intelligent, and make it flexible and agile, and make it do more faster. Scott, I think you've done a lot of thinking about intelligent content. You even started a conference called Intelligent Content. So perhaps you can say a few words about this.
Yeah. So I would say first, a book that we wrote so that marketers can understand, called Intelligent Content, a Primer, will be made available tomorrow from XML Press. So it'll be on sale in your favorite online bookstore. It's written by Ann Rockley, Charles Cooper, and myself. And the reason that we did this is because we recognized that it was time to think differently about content. Instead of throwing more and more resources at content problems, which is a typical solution, I think, for most organizations, or maybe reinventing another quick fix that only solves a singular challenge but creates additional problems, we needed to think more strategically about content. We needed a formal, repeatable system, a way of producing content designed to support us today, but also in the future. And we needed a method that would strip away all the productivity zapping, kind of unnecessary tasks that prevent us from being efficient. An approach, I guess I would say, that would allow us to focus on creating the high-quality content experiences that every customer touchpoint deserves, right, without breaking the bank, and that's the key there. If we move to the definition slide, you'll see that intelligent content has 5 characteristics. So for content to be intelligent, it must be modular, it must be structured, reusable, format-free, and semantically and structurally rich. So it's actually semantics that's really number 5 there that's more important. And when you have intelligent content, you get new capabilities. And the new capabilities slide is the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about that. You end up getting more discoverable content that's easier for your internal audience of content creators to surface and discover and to repurpose, which is the second capability. You get the ability to repurpose or reuse content in automated and semi-automated ways that are much more efficient and much less error-prone than the copy and paste traditional method that we call opportunistic or manual reuse. So we're aiming for automated reuse or semi-automated reuse, and also a system that would support these capabilities would allow us to adapt that content. So it's the modular pieces can be moved around, they can be reordered, they can be filtered, compared, contrasted, they can be adapted for different geographies. For example, something as simple as a recipe, if we're trying to get everybody to understand this, between an American and a Canadian reader, both reading in English and understanding things, some of the words need to be different. The units of measure would need to be adapted. And if, different kinds of techniques might have different names in Canada for cooking techniques, roasting versus broasting, or baking versus, there's just differences, right? And so we want to be able to adopt these new capabilities. And I think the key part here is that capability is the capacity to be able to do something different. So you're actually providing your organization with increased capacity to accomplish these things. And that's the real killer. It's not the software that you buy. It's nothing like that. You're aiming for something that upper management will care about, capacity.
It's the acceleration idea that I think is really important in this, the ability to do more faster. Sorry, I just hit the button to go on to the next slide. The ability to be more adaptable and be able to do more faster is really important here. I think when we talk about intelligent content, we also think about getting the content in the right shape for the right target audience, being able to personalize it quickly when you know what the target audience knows, etc. All of those things, a lot of those things come also from the discipline of creating then the right actual content, the right language, the right words on the page that are going to engage the audience. And that's where that's where Acrolinx comes in to provide this the content optimization piece to be able to say, okay, we're gonna guide the teams across the entire organization, guide the teams creating content, agencies and whatever, to be able to create content that's on brand and on target, and do that at an enterprise scale. So if you think of the IBM were at Content Marketing World a couple of weeks ago with us, talking about how thousands of users are running this the Acrolinx platform across all their content platforms, the web content management platform from IBM, Word, WordPress, and all sorts of XML platforms and data asset management platforms, etc. So that scale is, I think, a really important an important aspect of this. Let's move on to our next survey. We'd like to know whether your organization has a technology strategy to support content at scale, or whether you're just starting to think about this and maybe only the big pieces are there, or whether you don't really have a strategy for how technology is going to support you in creating great content. Scott, I think the world of marketing content and actually all content has become incredibly technological as the levels of automation have gone up and the potential for automation has gone up, right?
I agree, but I tend to think that today automation is really supporting the existing processes that marketers already use. They've been using traditionally to create more deliverables as quickly as possible, and then to measure what's going on with them and who's interacting with them and such. But there's much more to gain by moving upstream to thinking about how you're creating your content, who is creating it, what tools are they using. And a lot of the marketing automation tools are solving the problem at the bottom of the stream, not at the top. So we need to think of it holistically as one big life cycle in order to identify these areas we could improve.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, Chris, have you got some responses from us? So
yep.
Interesting. The majority is in the middle, in the sort of field. I think that's where they were on the last question as well. Most people are just starting to get or have the biggest pieces figured out, but are still working out how it actually works in practice. And I think the risk we see there is that very often people get the big pieces of technology in place first, and as Scott was saying, they think about their assets, what content do we have to shove about, what deliverables do I have, what mails, what blogs, what pieces of collateral do I have that I can throw at people. Then they don't think so much about are we really putting the right content in front of those people. So I would plead with you, when you're thinking about the technology for content, to really put the content front and center, and put the audience front and center, and the content needs of the audience front and center, and try to empathize with them. I think that's the key to being successful with your content.
It's a huge change for us. We've been taught by adapting our workflows to personal computers from the 80s forward. We were taught to write documents and store them in a folder called My Documents. We became reliant on technology, so it made sense. Anytime we needed new functionality, we would buy a different tool. And yet, this is the wrong approach at solving these problems. We really need to go back and figure out, what content are we creating? Who are we creating for? How much does it cost to create each one of these deliverables? Is this worth the money at the end of the day? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? Like, all those questions really have to be ironed out. Now, that said, I just held a workshop at Content Marketing World for around 70 people, teaching them about how to adopt intelligent content. Not anywhere in the description was there a discussion of tools, and yet the number one question is still, what tools should I buy? So I think even consultants like me need to adjust my thinking. Maybe I should start talking about tools, but then show what happens when you select them first. and what your results are when they're less than successful, maybe that would at least let people, talk about it for a little while and get a sense that there are tools out there that can help you. But I don't think buying them first or discussing them until you know what your problem is a healthy thing. I don't think you'd do it any other way. I don't think you'd start ordering a dump truck to pour a driveway before you built your house, because it would make no sense.
And we've done sessions before on being sure that you can measure success, that you know what success means to you, and that's rarely just the numbers of pieces of content that we have. It's more likely to be what's been the measurable effect on the audience, right?
Yes, exactly. Let's see what we can get through
the
last topic and take some questions from the audience. So I encourage the audience to use the Q&A panel to leave us a question. We're happy to answer.
Thank you. So, globalize is our third topic. We wanted to move into. I think this is becoming, again, like I talked about, content being a critical competitive advantage. I think being good globally is also a critical competitive advantage for companies now. Many established companies, I would say by far the majority, a huge majority of established companies are getting their biggest growth, the majority of their growth, from their global markets, not from their domestic markets. If you think about this, 95% of the population of the planet does not speak English as their first language. The numbers on how many people understand English at all are very flaky, but it's never going to be more than 20-30% wherever you go. Once you get past the first tagline or the first kind of branding statement, as soon as you get into detail communicating with people, you cannot expect to communicate with them in English and hope that works. Why does this matter? Well, 80% of the world's purchasing power is outside the U.S. So, if you're selling, you've seen, Apple's phenomenal growth right now is being driven as much out of China as it is out of the U.S. And so, the growth opportunity for companies is very often outside the domestic market, and being good at global is a competitive advantage. Speaking to people in their own language is a competitive advantage. This is something very dear to my heart. I chair a non-profit called Translators Without Borders, where we try to get life-changing content into local languages. And it's driven by the same idea, that if you talk to a man in a language, or any person, in fact, in a language he understands, it goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, it goes to his heart. And cynically, if you're trying to sell someone something, you're trying to, really, if you're trying to engage them in a conversation, then speaking their language is the way to do that. Is the way to make that link. Willy Brandt, who was an early politician, post-war politician in Germany, for those of you who don't know, he came to America and was talking to various American trade organizations about how to do business in Germany. How can we work together? And he said, if I'm selling to you, I will speak your language. If I'm buying from you, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen, which means then you need to speak German to me. In other words, if I'm on the buying side, then you need to do the effort. You need to go the extra mile to speak a language that I understand, that engages me. And I think I sometimes get the feeling, we joked about this before, but I think sometimes when you think about content marketing and very often marketing as a whole, the U.S. content marketing piece is moving ahead very fast, learning a lot. It's in really good shape. A lot of great stuff happening. The global content strategy is often struggling along there behind. Wouldn't you say, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the board today, and I think a lot of it is that we have focused on our own segment of the market if we were an American-focused company. And I think we've created our own best practices, like brands should always be communicated the same way. But in a global market, that's not the case. And so sometimes I think when we say content strategy and then we say global content strategy, it's almost not quite redundant. You know, a content strategy is about your business and how content is going to help you accomplish your vision. And if your vision is global, it doesn't even need to be global content strategy, right? It is part of your content strategy. So I think we have to bake into our thinking the rest of the world. You know, as you pointed out, 94% of the people on Earth don't really understand English well enough to understand our marketing mumbo jumbo in English. And so we have to figure out, what does that mean? And people who don't understand all the technologies that are out there often think that machine translation just solves those problems for us, but humans are fallible, so we make mistakes in our content, and those mistakes get translated too by machines that don't understand our intent. And so I think there is a problem here.
Yeah, too often the global part of this is the point where people start putting stuff in spreadsheets and emailing it to people. And you know, whenever you see a process that's supported by, spreadsheets as attachments, you know you've got a problem. That cannot be a scalable platform.
Yeah, especially when the content is text-based and the application, Excel, is meant for mathematical calculations. You can tell that that's not a good alignment. Yeah.
So what we see is that, this is another survey that I think was rather alarming, is that, the insight that global marketers typically have on their content, on their translation spend. In other words, and this I think shows how little people have visibility into and control over what happens to their message, to their story once it goes global. Too often, stuff will be sent abroad, and then somehow the local office will
Andrew, you're breaking up just a little bit. Sorry, you're breaking up just a little bit. I'm not sure if we can adjust your mic or something, but you're breaking up.
Okay. Is it back now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, I hope so. So, this is really about getting that visibility that we talked about before and being able to understand where are we, what are we doing, where are we spending money, and where are we trying to reach people, and what results are we getting from that spend. So I think that's an important thing to think about. There are all sorts of horror stories around translations, the Jolly Green Giant getting translated into Intimidating Green Monsters in Arabic, and there are millions of these, some of them more embarrassing than others.
Andrew, I'm sorry. You're breaking up pretty bad. We can't understand you right now. So I'm wondering if maybe Scott could jump in for a few seconds, and maybe we could dial back in or try that one more time, because you're still breaking up for some reason.
Okay. And Scott, perhaps we can just skip to the customer experience slide.
Scott, are you able to jump in?
Can you talk about this, Scott?
Can you hear me?
No, I can't hear you either. I'm sorry, you're both sort of breaking up a little bit here.
I can't hear you either.
Huh. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with the sound here.
I'm getting messages that I can be heard fine, so I think I might just carry on. I think the audience seems to be hearing me just fine. So,
why don't you do this? Why don't we try to dial back in really quick, hang up, and try to dial right back in? And in the meantime, I'll tell the audience just a couple of things.
No, I think the audience is hearing me just fine, Chris.
Oh, the audience is hearing you fine? Okay, all right, fine. Then go right ahead.
Everyone's saying on the chat that they can hear me just fine. So I'm just going to carry on and hope we can get to the questions. So we're actually really near the end. So this has been some really interesting research that Jake Sorofman's done recently at Gartner, talking about the customer experience and how really consistency is probably the most important thing that people are looking for. I think they're looking for you as an organization to project a personality. You can call that part of your brand, but that to do that consistently is what he calls the new delight. Scott, I know that this is very dear to your heart. I think this consistency piece is also becoming a competitive advantage, right?
It is, and researchers from way back, starting in the 50s and the 60s, business researchers, business strategists, not thinking specifically about content, we're talking about the success of organizations, and it turns out that consistency tends to be an indicator of the immaturity or the lack of formal processes to delight customers, because anything that you make that's inconsistent, your product production processes, software, or content can be impacted by this. And the customer cares, right? They want a solid experience, and they expect it today because they can get it elsewhere. And so I think that this is the new delight.
They expect it, and if they don't get it and someone else does it better, then you lose.
Yeah,
good.
Exactly.
So I hope that made sense. I think these three initiatives, the idea of unifying your experience, the idea of speeding everything up, the importance of technology and helping you do more faster, lots of people moving to agile, etc. I think that's all part of this acceleration, this increased velocity that people are talking about. And the third is really this global aspect. I think a competitive advantage will be being good at global. So I think these are really three key aspects to thinking about good content at scale. And with that, I think we would like to have some questions. We have about 8 minutes left, I reckon. Has Chris gone, or?
Yes, I'm on. I'm going to try to go ahead and push out a question for you guys. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you, so I'm going to push it out, and you can read it and answer it. How's that?
How are leading organizations tying things like metrics to their overall content strategy? That's a good question. I think first, organizations that do this well, they try to think through what the vision of their company is. So, for example, if you're going to try to unify your content and have a consistent experience, you have to know what it is that you're going to do with your content. Perhaps you want to be the largest manufacturer of smartphones sold to residents of the Southwest United States, and you want to become you're number 2 today, and you want to become number 1, and you want to do it by 2017. So you know where, you know who, you know what you're trying to accomplish exactly, and you know when your deadline is. And so organizations are starting to think like this, and then tie everything they do to mapping that to how they're going to get there. And so you have to start with what you're going to do, I think, and what your goals and your vision for your content are, and then map to how am I going to do it. It's kind of a moving target for everyone, because the goals also change sometimes, which means that our content lifecycle needs to be fluid, it needs to be flexible, it needs to be all-encompassing, and that's a new way of thinking for some organizations.
Yeah, and I think defining what success means is really important.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and push out another question for you guys. Why not just hire more people?
Why not hire more people? Okay. I think if you have budget to hire more people, you have budget to do a lot of things. And so you might want to ask yourself, is hiring more people the best solution? Will it prepare our organization for both today, the world that we're trying to catch up to, and will it afford us the luxury of being prepared for the future? So hiring more people is seldom the answer, and it's also harder to do, right? Getting full-time commitment for budget from leaders means employing somebody for, depending upon where they live, a long time and a lot more dedication. And we're still just using manual brute force to accomplish things that should be strategic and often automated. There are parts of the creative process that are truly human. There are a lot of parts that are not. Selecting fonts and designing documents is not required, for a human to do every single time that a document is created. We can create style sheets for that, which means that we have to bring in a process. It's not just about the web. It's about automating the things that computers are better at doing and using them as workhorses, not just assistants for our content production. So I think the hiring more people question is probably not on the table at most companies, but where it is, there should be a decision tree where you decide, do we need some more people? And maybe you do. But do we need better technology? Maybe you do. Maybe you need a better strategy.
And you still have the problem of how to scale it, right? You still have to put everything in those people's heads. In principle, you'd like to hire people and you'd like to teach them everything you know in one go. You give them some training, and then they would automatically know everything you know about how to project your brand and your brand personality. But of course, it's much, much harder than that. And the issue is, how do you get that consistency, that one brand personality, that engaging content, successfully communicating with people at that scale? Of course, you can hire more people, and there are plenty of good offshore operations that will give you people who, many of whom can write really well. But what do they know your brand? Do they, have they really internalized that? And that's really the challenge. Growing fast, scaling this is and doing well at scale consistently is really hard.
Okay, let's try another question here for you guys. How are global organizations addressing user-generated content in their content strategy? That's a good question.
That is a good question. So there are organizations that built into their content strategy the fact that it was global and customers would be part of the pool of people they consider. So a company like iFixit.com, for example, relies heavily on user-generated content, but they built standards and governance and training into the process. So it's not kind of a Facebook world where anything goes, right? You can publish anything that you can put in the container. Instead, they've got a strategy for how that content will be repurposed automatically, how it will be reskinned and presented for every different device profile that they're aiming at. They thought about it from the start. So they're not jimmy-rigging a paper or a web production process, which are page-based. They actually thought about the content from the beginning. And when user-generated content enters the mix, there is no easy solution, right? It's very difficult and probably overly expensive to professionally translate user-generated content. And machines aren't equipped to do it because human beings don't follow rules when they're producing user-generated content. But is it valuable? Yes. Can you find meaning in it? Sure. Could you duplicate some of their efforts? Oh, yeah. And should you include them? I think yes, because you're going to learn a lot more from it. But it's not something that you can harness as easily, right, in the way that we want it to control our internal branding. But it's important.
Yeah, and one of the issues with user-generated content is great. I think it's a fantastic way of generating a feeling of community and a feeling of we're in here, we're all customers, we're all doing this stuff. I think it's a great way. It's a great way of very efficiently allowing customers to work together, often very constructively on finding solutions. The one thing that user-generated content doesn't have, and where I think companies are still that have gone perhaps too much towards the idea of relying exclusively on user-generated content, is it doesn't have your brand. It doesn't, you could say that doesn't really matter at that point, but of course, if we've talked about really thinking about the whole content experience as being relevant for engaging prospects and driving your business, then of course it kind of matters. And so you see a lot of companies now moving towards moderating user-generated content really fairly carefully, not ridiculously, but fairly carefully, to ensure that their brand is kind of still reflected in what goes on. So I think it's a maturing aspect of the process, for sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap that up here. We're just about out of time today. I want to thank the audience for some great questions, and I will get those to Acrolinks, to the ones that we didn't get to live, get those to Acrolinks to answer directly for you guys. And thank you very much, Andrew and Scott. Really appreciate your time today with this great webcast. Thank you, Acrolinks, also for sponsoring today's webcast. That is all the time we have for our broadcast today. We do look forward to seeing you here next time, right here at Digital Marketing Depot.